welcome to this tutorial. It's all about using natural elements in your artwork. So here's one that I have made, which you'll be seeing shortly. And all you need to do is go out for a walk and gather some things. So feathers, twigs, I've got some dried mugwort, some dried lavender, and then we are going to use different types of natural pigments. So these are just found in the kitchen. So this one's turmeric and this is beetroot. And you can be really creative. If you've got berries, you could use berries. I've also got some things from the Florence Mine Art Centre, which this is iron ore pastel, and there's also some iron ore watercolour which I'll be using. But you can, if you can't get anything like that, you could also use some soil or anything like that. And if you haven't got enough things to use, there are lots of places online where you can get natural pigments from too if you can't make your own. So in today's tutorial we will be making an abstract art piece with all these beautiful natural materials. I hope you really enjoy it and I can't wait to see what you create. Here is some powdered beetroot and some turmeric. You can get these from the supermarket. And this is a set of iron ore and chalk pigments from the Florence Art Centre. And this is a watercolour, this is also iron ore. I've collected things like feathers and lavender sticks and some dried mugwort. You can collect anything out of nature that you can find. Twigs might be nice as well. And I'm using watercolour paper. This is 350 GSM watercolour paper by Bockingford. That's the watercolour paper that I like the best. And I've also got some river water, so whenever I go somewhere I always collect some water. I'm going to add some of the river water to the beetroot and the turmeric until it's a nice consistency. It's up to you how much you add, and you don't have to use river water. You could use seawater, and if you don't have that you could collect rainwater in the garden. That'd work just as well. And the consistency will differ between if you want it nice and thick or if you want a thin kind of consistency. There's no rules to this. It's just experimenting and just playing. And as you can see, I'm just going to add some more water to the beetroot because that got taken up quite quickly when I put it in. I love the colours. I just love the colours so much. And I'm going to wet all the back of the watercolour paper. You know, you don't have to do this, but what I find is if you wet it all, it's really better for the texture, and for when you're adding the paint it's a lot nicer because it just kind of pools across the page rather than just going into dry paper. You can also use gum strip to put around the edge of the paper to make it stay in place and not curl up, because sometimes depending on the thickness of the watercolour it can curl up. Watercolour paper I meant, it can curl up. So I'm just going to add some beetroot. Ooh, look at that colour, it is delicious. And I had no kind of idea in my head when I started what I was going to do or what I was going to make. So I'm just adding some circle shapes. Now also note that when you finish using your brushes you must wash them thoroughly, because it's a food kind of thing. It can go mouldy in your bristles, so make sure you wash them really thoroughly. You can also use separate brushes, you don't have to use the same brushes, but I really like this one for making big shapes. Ooh, look at the turmeric and the way it is just running on the paper. If there was more water on the paper, it'd run even better. So if you wanted it to spread across the paper, you could add more water to it. I'm just tapping my brush now to get some spots of colour onto the paper, so they'll just spread naturally. Again, if you want them to be bigger or more flowy, you'd add more water to the turmeric. This was the first time I'd used this iron ore watercolour, and it was really weird. So normally when you use watercolour and you put the water on it, you have to put quite a lot of water on it at first to get rid of the top layer so you actually get to the paint inside. On this one, the water just kept disappearing. It was like it just kept drying up. It was very, very weird, and something to consider if I'm going to do more paintings with it again. If you watch when I add the water to the actual watercolour, how quick it dries. It's very weird. It gave off a really nice browny kind of paint colour though, so I did like that a lot. I apologise that the bottom half of the paper is actually off camera. I didn't realise this until the very end. I thought I'd set it up so you could see the whole thing, but basically I'm just painting some spotty kind of things at the end. So this is using the iron ore pastel, which worked very differently on dry paper than on wet watercolour. And I imagined that it was going to blend in really beautifully, and actually it didn't blend in that much. I'm now using a fan brush because I like the way that the fan brush spreads the colour normally over the page, but as you can see it took quite a lot of goes to make this pastel spread. But again, it is all experimenting and there's no right or wrong ways to do this, so you won't have the same things as me, and that's totally fine. Just play with whatever you've got. I recommend having an old tea towel or a rag with you so you can dry your brushes off on it, you can dry your fingers on it, and you can also use it to dab on top of any very wet paint on your paint surface. So yeah, having an old tea towel is a really good tip. I'm going to experiment with the watercolour block by dipping it in the water. I do not recommend this with normal pans of watercolour, but I'm just having a go to see what happens with this one because, like I said, the water dried up on it so fast. I'm going to show you now what I mean. It just disappears really quickly. It's the weirdest thing. Look at it, it's like it's really porous and it's going inside the watercolour block. Very odd. So when you're using new materials, it's always good to experiment and play around because you never know how they're going to work. Like I didn't know how this was going to work. I thought it would work like normal watercolours. The watercolours that I really love using are Derwent Professional watercolours and Winsor & Newton Professional watercolours. I found that they're the best pigment colour, and I also want to give a shout out to my bestie Cooler from Handmade Dorset, Create with Cooler. She makes her own paints out of pigments and they are beautiful to use. They're amazing, really, really lovely bright colours. Feathers are a really nice way of getting different textures and getting different marks. Now, as you can see, I am trying to do little dots with the feathers, but I think because the tip is so fine, it's not coming out very well. Again, experiment, play around, use the actual feather bit if you wanted as well. It's just about experimenting, mark making, and just playing around with different materials and seeing what you can create. When you're thinking about creating a picture, think about balance and think about leaving some spaces blank. So it's a fine balance, and you'll get this over time when you're practicing and you think, right, if I put this colour in this corner, what would be the balance? Would it be in the opposite corner? Would it be on the same side? Just always think about the balancing of the colours and the textures and the size of the different shapes as well. Again, it's experimenting and playing around with it. Some people like to cover the whole page, some people like to leave big blank spaces. It is your preference at the end of the day, whatever you prefer.